Hello beautiful souls, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today we're going to be talking about Akhenaten. And if you are watching my readings, you have probably noticed that I have this little statue of Akhenaten in the corner of my readings. And so today I was really guided to talk a little bit about Akhenaten and why I believe that his knowledge is very relevant for the times that we are living in today. And we're also going to be talking about Aten, the meaning of Aten, about the star connections between Sirius and Akhenaten, and in general also about ancient Egyptian mythology. So Akhenaten was a pharaoh who reigned in 1300 BC. And Akhenaten's name was originally Amenhotep IV, which means Amun is satisfied. And he is known as the heretic pharaoh. Why is that? Because Akhenaten institutionalized a religious reform. He abandoned polytheism and reoriented the people of ancient Egypt towards monotheism. He was teaching that there is only one source. And for Akhenaten, the name of this source was Aten. And that's why he changed his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten. And the name Akhenaten means the living spirit of Aten. So with this he said that he is the living embodiment of Source. And with this message, he was teaching about Christ consciousness, about unity consciousness, 1300 years before Jeshua. 1300 years before Jesus Christ. He was already teaching about the divine spark 500 years before the coming of Gautama Buddha. Because the teachings of Buddha and the teachings of Christ are really that the spark of the divine is within ourselves. Because Christ said that I am a child of God. But it was not only himself. He said that all of us are children of God, which means all of us have the divine spark within ourselves. And this was really the teaching of Akhenaten, that we are divine beings, that we are a living embodiment of that divine spark. So the Egyptian religion originates from Atlantis, and in Atlantean times we believe that there is only one source. However, there were these different aspects of this one source that were represented by different high priests and high priestesses. For example, we have Inna or Isis, who was the representation of the rising sun, the representation of beauty and the personification of magic. So it was High Priestess Isis in Atlantean times who thought about the rising of the sun and who thought about the magic and who thought about that specific aspect or emanation of source. The early ancient Egyptian culture adopted their beliefs from Atlantis, because originally ancient Egypt was an Atlantean colony, the Atlantean colony of Cam. And Akhenaten reigned in the age of Aries. And if we think about the precession of the equinoxes, the zodiacal ages of humanity, there is this uprising of consciousness and there is this fall of consciousness. We move through the cycles of awakening and the cycles of perceived separation from Source. And if we look at the zodiacal ages of humanity like a clock, then the age of Aries was the furthest away from Source. It was the deepest descent into the darkness. So with this we have to think about the attributes of Aries. What does Aries stand for? It is really this hero-like appearance, where the focus is very much centered on the self. So we really see the worship of the physical body. We have to think about the Roman Empire. These were the times of war. And people were really forgetting about the infusion of spirit in the physical body. We have to think of the archetypes of the warrior, about the archetype of the champion, about aristocracy, about these heroic alpha male figures governing society. And it was only the physical body that was worshipped. And this physical body was only seen as a survival machine. It was not seen as a vessel of source. And in these times, the Amun Priesthood was the strongest ruling force in ancient Egyptian society. And the Amun Priesthood was based in the Karnak temple of ancient Egypt, where they worshipped the god Amun as their supreme deity. And these were the times where this priesthood was really corrupted, because they were almost more powerful than the pharaoh at that time. They were taking the riches of the people, they were taking the power away from the people, and they were really abusing their power in the name of spirituality. So they believed in the many different gods, which actually were simply these emanations of the one source, which were really the high priests of the Atlantean times, representing that specific attribute or that specific emanation of source. So when Akhenaten became the pharaoh of ancient Egypt, he changed the tradition and he institutionalized monotheism. He taught to the people that we don't need priests in order to connect with source, because source is to be found within. And he also changed the capital of the dynasty of that time. He changed the capital from Thebes, which is known as Luxor nowadays, to Amarna, which lies exactly at the middle point between Luxor and Cairo. And he also changed the architecture of the temples in Amarna. The temples in Amarna were with an open sky where one could see the stars. And with this, Akhenaten wanted to say that all the stars, they are emanations of Aten. They are emanations of source. So instead of worshipping statues or the idols of the ancient Egyptian gods, he wanted to reorient the beliefs of the people to venerate nature and to connect with nature and to ultimately find that spark of the divine within themselves. So Akhenaten was really a Christ consciousness being. What does Christ consciousness mean? Christ means enlightened, the Christant light, the enlightened spark of source in our heart. And Christ consciousness, which is actually unity consciousness, is the state of consciousness that we are one with the light of source, that we are literally sparks of the divine. And it's very interesting because Akhenaten also changed the art of that time, where usually the figures in the Egyptian temples seem to be very rigid, seem to be very two-dimensional. He wanted to be depicted with more curvy features, with more feminine features. And with this he wanted to show the people that we all have both the divine feminine and the divine masculine within ourselves. So in all his depictions, Akhenaten really has this androgynous appearance, where also the waist is very feminine and the features are very soft. Because again, with this he wanted to represent this balance of the divine energies. And the reason why I was guided to talk about Akhenaten today was really that during the 7/7 Gateway, on the 7th of July during the Sirius Gateway, I received a vision about Aten, and I was asked by my star family to talk about that vision. So this explanation may differ from other explanations, but all I am doing is simply sharing my perspective and my understanding of Aten. So the way that I was told to explain Aten is really that this sun disk, that sun, is a visual representation of source. And all the rays are these emanations of source. And there are many people who believe that this sun disk is actually an object. There are many people who believe that maybe this sun disk represents a UFO, or that this sun disk simply represents the physical sun, but it is really a representation of source. And we have to think of this sun disk being the center, being source, where all the consciousness emanates from. It's the source of all light, the source of all consciousness. And all the rays are these emanations of source light. And these rays are depicted as hands holding an Ankh. And this is a very, very interesting aspect. When we go to the cinema, for example, there is a projector from where the image is being beamed out onto a screen. But the source of the light, the source of that information is the projector. Because without the light, without the image that is being projected by the beamer, there would be no image on the screen. So we really have to think about Aten, the sun disk itself, as being like this beamer, like this projector that is projecting the light out. But everything we see, everything that is observable, everything that is crystallized in form, is simply a projection of that light. So to make this easier to understand, we have to think about our sun, the sun in our solar system. It is the sun that holds all the light. It is the sun that holds all the information. And all the planets and all the beings in the solar system are like this ray, are this emanation of that one light. But the consciousness is still connected to the sun. And everything we perceive in the world, on Earth, or in the universe itself is simply a projection. It is simply like us looking at the screen of a cinema. But actually the light, the information and the image comes from the star. It comes from the sun, and it is actually beamed out of the sun. So it is really the sun that holds all the light and that holds all the consciousness. And if we zoom out, if we look at this from a source perspective, everything comes from source. And everything that we perceive is simply this emanation of source. It's like this hand that is reaching out and projecting the reality. And when Akhenaten says that he is the living spirit of Aten, he really refers to his divine nature, that he is a spark of source, that Aten, that source, that the light of source lives within himself. And he is the embodied emanation of that source light. He is like the very end of that ray. He is the Ankh. And this is where it gets even more interesting, because if we look at the symbol of the Ankh, which is the symbol of life, which is the symbol of light, it is really the representation of source, light, and star. And that's also the reason why this channel is called Source Light Star. It is derived from the symbol of the Ankh, which means source, the source of everything, the one source where everything emanates from. Then there is light, which is the emanation of source, which are like the rays of light that are emanating from Aten. And then at the very end there is the Ankh, which would be like the star, which is the crystallization of that source light into form, which is the living embodiment of source. We ourselves are the Ankh, and the Ankh itself, we ourselves, are emanations of source. And with this we have to think about the analogy of a tree, the tree trunk being source. And then there are the bigger branches and the smaller branches, and at the very end we have a leaf. And the leaf is like the Ankh. It is like the crystallization of source light into form. But the very Ankh is the whole tree itself, because it is connected to the tree trunk. It is connected to source. So we have to think of ourselves almost like this projection of light, like this ray of light, like this crystallization of source light into form. But this form is simply a projection. It is simply like us looking at the screen of a movie that comes from source. And we are that spark of source. We are this emanation of source light. But the word Aten actually refers to everything that is cyclical. It is this infinite cycle of creation, this infinite cycle of emanation from source. And at the very end of this emanation is the divine spark. is ourselves, is like the star. We are stars, we are sparks of the divine. And Akhenaten was really this ascended master who descended into the earth plane to teach about this source wisdom, because again it was the time of deepest darkness where there was this greatest perceived separation from source, the deepest fall of consciousness. And that's why it is an evolutionary necessity to bring in these ascended masters from the higher realms that are grounding this wisdom into the earth plane. And there are many people who believe that Akhenaten was Moses, bringing the original teachings of Source, whose original message was obviously distorted later on. And after the death of Akhenaten, the Amun Priesthood re-institutionalized the polytheistic faith of ancient Egypt. They tried to erase every attempt of Akhenaten to change the belief of the people of that time. So they really destroyed all the temples, and they also scratched off the faces of both Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti from the tombs in Minya. And the son of Akhenaten was Tutankhaten, better known as Tutankhamun, who was forced to change his name into Tutankhamun. And Tutankhamun was really a young pharaoh, and because of that he was really pressured by the Amun Priesthood to re-institutionalize the polytheistic faith. And in all his depictions, Akhenaten, his wife Nefertiti, and all of his daughters and sons, they were depicted with a largely elongated head, but also with the symbol of the Uraeus, which is the serpent that emerges from the inner eye. And it is a symbol of awakened consciousness, because the symbol of the Uraeus is representing the knowledge of the subtle energies. It is representing the knowledge of the Kundalini energy, which is the coiled energy that is mostly represented by the snake in many ancient cultures, not only in Egypt but all around the world. So this was really a symbol of royalty, a symbol of the knowledge of these subtle energies. But the symbol of the serpent itself is also very much connected to Sirius. So there are many people who believe that Akhenaten is a direct descent of Syrian beings. So we can really debate whether Akhenaten was simply a Syrian starseed, a Syrian soul that was incarnated in a human body, or we can debate that Akhenaten was actually an extraterrestrial hybrid, or we could also debate that Akhenaten was a star being that descended from Sirius. There were many elongated heads found all over the world which do not only have human DNA. And it's really in the lineage of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Many kings and queens of ancient Egypt, they seem to have a largely elongated head. And this can simply be a visual representation of the connection to the stars, of the connection to star beings from Sirius, but it could also be literal. And this is very much reflected also in the art of the time. And the reason why I am sharing this is because once I started to investigate, once I started to ask questions about why do all these figures have these elongated heads, or why do so many cultures all around the world have the symbol of the snake, and why do all these cultures have these very similar beliefs, and why do all these cultures have these immense megalithic structures that are connected to the stars. And it was really by asking these questions that opened up this whole new chapter about extraterrestrials.